This is Kew Gardens, internationally renowned for its world-class collection of plants and its magnificent greenhouses. But 250 years ago, it was well known for an entirely different reason. This was the royal playground of George III, a British Versailles, and at the centre of which was the magnificent White House Palace. It was George's favourite home, and we've come here to find it. We've got one really big clue, this sundial, which is supposed to mark the location of the palace where George spent some of his madder years. But how big was it? What did it look like? And most importantly, where is it now? Time Team have got just 3 days to find out. This is our target, the magnificent White House, as it was when George III moved in. And given the handy sundial, finding it should be a piece of cake.
Well, you're quite right, we really do, and X marks the spot here. But we have all this evidence for the White House here, but we simply don't know what sits beneath the ground. And that's what an archaeological excavation is going to be able to tell us, what survives here.
Jonathan, what would you like to see come out of the next 3 days?
Well, we know that some work was done here, substantial work by William Kent, one of England's most regarded architects. But we don't know whether he just slapped a facade onto an old house, and after his work was finished, we don't know what George III did to it when he moved here in the 1770s, 80s.
It does seem to me that you've both got rather architectural goals, but all I can think of is the fact that this poor, frightened, lonely, mad man was stuck here for so long. Do you think there's a chance that we'll be able to get evidence of him and his life?
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as we can get some trenches in, we'll be excavating the rooms of the building, and with luck, we'll be finding artefacts and finds within those which will give us the window on those lives.
Not surprisingly, geophysics are concentrating their search for the palace around the sundial. The red building at the back is the Dutch house, which was the nursery for George's children, all 15 of them. It's one of 3 surviving buildings which were part of the palace complex. The other 2 are the kitchens to the west and the orangery to the east.
Here you are. There's the sundial,
Yeah.
There's the orangery. Now if we look at the resistance, if I place that
that's
there,
very strong, isn't it?
that lines up exactly with the front of the orangery.
This is a big moment for Jonathan. It's the first physical evidence of a palace that until now he's only known from books and documents.
Well, I've been walking over the site of this building for 6 years, hoping to get a glimpse of it one day, and there it is. I mean, it has to be that wall, doesn't it?
What's confusing is it looks 4 or 5 metres wide.
But that's going to be bigger than a wall, isn't it?
Well, this is certainly a wall. I mean, this is the garden front to the house itself, isn't it?
I mean, it could be a big, substantial wall with rubble either side, or we might be looking at a wall with a floor intact.
Yeah.
Do you think that's significant, that gap?
Well, it's just possible it might be an entrance, but we don't know where the corners are.
Where is this on the ground?
Well, it's this side of the sundial. I mean, basically, we've got a wall coming through on this sort of line, right the way through here. We don't know where it turns, we don't know where it turns that end. But that sort of entrance that you're implying would be about here.
11 o'clock day 1 and our first trench goes in, just to the right of the sundial, where we're hoping to pick up evidence of the front wall of the White House. We may have permission to dig up one of Kew's smartest lawns, but we're going to have to be on our best behaviour because some of Britain's most highly trained gardeners will be watching our every move.
Some are down there.
But Phil's mind, as ever, is on the archaeology, and even before the turf comes off, it sounds promising.
About 5 metres wide.
Better still, Kew have provided us with a wicked bit of kit which will help us get to it even quicker.
Good God. Look at that.
It really is.
Oh, it's easy, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I imagine it only works well if you've got a nice lawn, but it's still nice though, isn't
It's
it?
like a little Swiss roll. Where do they go?
Stick them back over at the back.
We know that there was once a Tudor mansion on the site, and one of the questions we want to answer is, was it knocked down to make way for the White House Palace, or did the architect William Kent build his wonderful stuccoed palace around it? And we're hoping that Phil's trench will help us unearth the answer. But it's early days yet, and there's no sign of any stucco. Phil just seems to have found a gravel pit. It's not only the digging that'll help us to unlock the secrets of the White House Palace. Stuart will be using Kew's extensive collection of 18th century maps to help us pinpoint it more accurately. But the real key to the site is this: a survey of the palace by architect William Chambers. It shows in great detail the ground plan of the building, and from it we can already identify some of the rooms. The state rooms would have been here along the garden facade. This would have been an internal courtyard, and the royal privies would have been tucked away at the back. But geophysics seems to think they're doing perfectly well without the plan. They've just got their second set of results from the heart of the palace.
Well, we're just thinking maybe about another trench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's it going to go? What have we got? What's
Well,
the plot say?
Look, this is where your first trench is. There.
Right.
If you want to put something in, I would actually put a trench like that. And the reasoning being, you're looking at this possible internal wall here,
That's good
Yeah.
enough.
and then you're looking at these responses, then you can see if there's any intact floor levels. I mean, these are the main walls,
Yeah.
and I think it's going to do something like that.
Yes. So we're right in the middle of the house with this second
Yeah.
trench, aren't we?
That'd be
That's a good place to
sooner
play.
or later we
So,
want to
can
know
you
what's going
mark
on inside as well as outside.
10 by
Yeah.
2. Hold it, where's... if I do it
We're
on
putting
that.
in a second trench to try and locate some of the internal rooms of the palace. And once we find clear wall lines, we'll use Chambers' plan to help us confirm where we are in the building. Phil spent 27 years lifting turfs by hand, but he's succumbed to the new technology and he's getting a crash course in mechanical turf cutting.
That's the technical bit.
Yeah. Hang on.
We'll need a bit more practice before I let him loose on my lawn.
I think that's very commendable, even though I do say so myself.
While George was locked away here, trapped in his own madness, what was going on in the outside world?
It was a time of tumultuous events in Europe. Napoleon was bestriding the continent. Britain was at one point standing alone against the French Empire. It was a time of great industry. The Industrial Revolution was proceeding apace. It was a time of really when Britain became far more confident, far wealthier, ironically at the same time revering the old mad king, who provided a very useful figurehead.
This place was used as a retreat when he suffered from porphyria, which is seen as madness. So after a point in the late 1780s, I think people treated him with a bit more distance.
So he wasn't really mad, he just had an illness.
Absolutely. At the time, they thought he'd completely gone doolally. But since then, we've realised, or medical historians have realised, that actually it was a blood disease, not senility. Probably by the time of his last illness, by 1810, he really was mad. He was old, he was blind, he probably was genuinely affected with some sort of senility. But before then, it was a disease of the blood.
Did he really talk to a tree?
He did, I'm afraid. Yeah, he did all sorts of awful things, which he was reminded of when he recovered.
Back in Trench 1, where we were hoping to find the facade of the palace, Phil's gravel layer has turned into a huge pit, notable for its complete lack of archaeology. Phil?
What?
Is that a great big hole in the ground with nothing in it?
For this?
Yeah,
No, it's a great big hole filled up with gravel.
but no archaeology.
Well, it's all part of the story, Tony. They They knock a building down, they got a big hole, and they filled it up with gravel.
Nick wants to close the trench down and move Phil onto another.
I have to say, concerned whether or not we're actually going to get very much out of this. To me, it looks as if this may well be one huge robbing trench and we may well have lost everything.
Come on, Phil, we can't spend the whole day digging in a trench that's pretty much been robbed out.
This is only day one. Day one. This trench has not been open for very long. We have not found the palace yet. We've got to keep going. You ain't getting me out of this trench yet.
Apart from Phil, everyone's getting increasingly worried that the building may have been totally robbed out and there may be nothing left for us to find. So it's a huge relief when just under the turf, Trench 2 produces some brickwork.
Whoops. And look at the line of that too. It's bang on line with the course of the orangery. This is going in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, at last.
It's a piece of palace.
Yeah.
There we go. Smell the palace.
And just across the lawn in Trench 1, Phil's looking quite pleased with himself too. What have you got?
Look, we've got the back wall of what looks like a cellar. There's one edge of it coming along there, and the front edge is there, and extending away from that, we've got the floor going in that direction, that way.
How you feeling, Nick?
I was convinced, well, pretty much convinced that we weren't going to get very much out of this trench, that we were chasing a lost cause. Phil's been proved right, and I have to say I'm quite pleased, actually.
So what are we going to do tomorrow, Phil?
Well, we're going to chase that floor across there and hopefully find the front of the palace out there.
So we've got a fragment of the basement here, we've got a fragment of an inside wall there. Tomorrow, let's hope we get right inside King George III's palace. Join us after the break. Yesterday evening, everything seemed to be going so well. It looked like we got a fragment of Mad King George's palace in Phil's trench over there, and another fragment in this trench here. But now it's the beginning of day 2, and suddenly we've hit a big problem. John, what's the matter?
Well, the geophysics just doesn't tie up with any of the plans we've got for the buildings. The
In what way?
dimensions are all wrong. We've got that wall showing clearly in Phil's trench. That's nice, that's the front wall. But on the geophysics, this wall here is 25 metres away, but the plan shows it to be only 15. They just don't tie up.
Nick thinks the best way to solve the problem is to test John's geophys results by putting a trench into the clearest feature to see if it really is part of the palace. But he can't.
Well, if we look at the plan here, directly in line of the area where we want to put the trench in is a gas pipeline. And we can't touch that, so that's the end of that trench.
So we're completely stuck?
Well, we want to put another trench in at the back of the building over here.
This is somewhere along here?
That's right, yeah. We want to locate the back of the building.
But they can't put a trench into the back of the building because they don't yet know where it is. So it's now down to Stuart and his maps to solve the problem. He's trying to find out why there's a mismatch between Chambers' plan and the geophys results to see if he can tie down the location of the palace.
Have you got this already scanned in?
Yeah, we've Neil's just got that sorted.
Yeah.
And we also have this plan, which he's just scanning now, which is the actual sort of floor plan of the building. So hopefully, with a bit of error, but we should be able to overlay that onto this map and work out which room we're digging in.
So we can sort out geophysics mess, can we?
Right, okay.
Oblivious to the confusion unfolding around them, the archaeologists in Trench 2 have been quietly uncovering more brickwork, and they've come up with our first find.
David?
Oh, hi, Krenza.
Hi there, I hear you've got something to show me.
Yes. Great little find here, look.
Oh, that's fantastic.
This is a stem from a royal Georgian wine glass, and it takes us right to the heart of life in the palace. The Georgians loved their booze and liked to drink it from flamboyant glassware. The top-of-the-range glasses that you might find in a palace were extraordinarily intricate, with patterned twists in the stems and elaborate decorated bowls. They must have been extremely fiddly to make. So we've set modern glassmaker Bob Crooks the challenge of recreating some Georgian glasses.
So how are you going to start?
Well, at the minute we're going to be making an air twist stem, and which is the bowl and the stem all in one piece. And what we've actually got here at the bottom section, we're putting 4 grooves in it, and eventually when that's actually covered in clear glass, we'll trap a bubble in each of those grooves, which will then twist up later in the process.
So you're putting it back in the bucket of melted glass.
That's
now.
right. Just
The trick is to maintain the glass at a constant temperature and to keep it turning so that the pattern can be twisted within the stem. It's a complex process that took a gang of 5 men to produce, but he's making it look easy.
Hi John, Stuart here.
Have you got those maps there, Stuart? We're getting desperate out here.
Yeah, they're actually just being done at this very moment. We're just seeing the house drop over the top of your geophysics, John, and it'll be printed within a couple of minutes now.
Okay, if you can make it 1 minute instead of 2.
it's halfway there now.
Bob's working lead glass here. What's the advantage of that over the soda glass that was being used before in England?
Well, it was sort of invented to rival it, but actually it was much more robust. It had a wonderful light refraction. It magnified things. Wine looked good in it. Chandeliers looked wonderful in it. And it was very tough. In fact, it was a British speciality. And even the gin glasses in pubs were made out of it.
Fantastic. That is just so beautiful. Smooth.
So that's 1 down and 6 to go.
My God, you do like to complicate things.
Wow. Yeah,
Where did that come from?
But what is it, though?
Let's have a look.
I mean, we were just machining this back to get rid of what we thought was demolition rubble, and there's just this enormous block of standing masonry. Look, you've got bricks coming along there, a brick skin coming along there, and then that massive core in there.
Right, let's figure it out. That's going in that direction, straight toward the Dutch house.
Right.
Down here, this wall you got earlier,
Yeah.
that's going off at about 90 degrees.
Right.
So I reckon this should be on the alignment of the palace. So if that's the outside wall there,
right,
lining up with the orangery, that I reckon is an inside wall. Why it's got 2 skins, I've no idea. But if I was a betting man, I'd put at least £2, maybe 3 on it.
That's rash. What on what?
On this being the inside wall and this being the front, the facade of the house.
Yeah,
So at last, Phil and Jonathan are convinced they've found the facade which would have fronted the grandest rooms of the palace. Or have they? Not according to Stuart and Henry. Jonathan, over here.
Let's have a look.
We're virtually in the middle of day 2. And listen to what he's found out.
Slight wobbler to throw at you, I'm afraid.
What have we got?
Well, we've managed to work out exactly where the position of the White House is and where your trenches are. Where Phil's trench is in the garden, across what was probably a path, and the other trench is just hitting the house over there. That's where it is, boys.
Nick, our time's been wasted.
Well, absolutely not. I mean, I'm absolutely perplexed because we found archaeology, we found good archaeology in Phil's trench. And we've just been looking at it, we've just been discussing the implications of what it means, and we were very, very happy for it to being a corner of this pavilion here. I really need to sit down and have a look at this.
You're not sure he's right, are you?
I'm not sure you're right. It looks wrong. This looks wrong.
Henry and myself
look at the size
sweat
of
of
it.
blood. It fits with the scaling of the measurements.
The scaling explains the geophysics, certainly.
If Stuart's right, the White House is sited much further north than we'd thought, so whatever Phil's found, it can't be the front wall. Jonathan, you're twitching.
Something's wrong about this, you see. You see the size of the orangery?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at it on that plan. The White House is 1.5 times the length of the orangery. And if you sort of take the centre of that, it's going to be there.
Yeah,
they're the same length. It's 50% out.
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is you're going to have to put a trench in at this end now.
Yeah.
Yep, we're
What's going on?
And
That's
do
right.
what we said, still try to find
Yeah.
that back wall, but base it on the map.
That's the next thing to
Yeah.
do, I think, is double check this is right by looking for the back wall as you've shown it.
So put another trench in, give you a bit of thinking time,
I think so.
and I'm going to break the news to Phil. Phil,
Hello, Tony.
can I come in your trench?
Yeah.
You remember how pleased you were yesterday because you decided that you'd been digging in the right place, not the wrong place?
Didn't think there was any issue of doubt at all.
Well, I think there is, mate. According to Stuart, you're in totally the wrong place. You can go home. Look. Let's have a look. That's the house.
Yeah.
There's your trench in the garden.
Well, then I would say the archaeology disagrees with that.
Go on.
Why have you clenched your fist like
I'm
that?
saying, good man. I'm absolutely behind you. Look,
It's not a competition.
it's a sheer relief, that's all.
We're pulling together to get at the truth.
Let me explain to you what I think is happening here.
Yeah.
First of all, they've dug an enormous trench. That is the natural bedrock on that side.
Yeah.
You know, where they've dug this enormous foundation trench and they've actually built in the base of it a massive wall. Now, just behind where Jonathan
Hang on,
is,
show me where this wall is.
the one wall is the edge, that was the one we found yesterday.
Yeah.
And the other edge is back here. So
Yeah.
we've got this massive wall going that way. We've also got a wall going at 90 degrees to it, this one here. And we know that this one and this one are the same date because you can see that these bricks overlap one another. So that this wall and this wall must be the same date.
There's no way that this stuff could be garden features.
No way.
It's so far down and so massive and broad. This is to carry something exceptionally heavy. If that plan was right, you'd have the facade of the White House looking onto an enormous feature which would be obscuring
I just
it.
don't
and no
believe
views
it.
from the
I
gardens
don't believe
show
it.
us that ever existed. I don't believe it. But I don't know what on earth this is.
Just had a little tiny thought. It's not something like a ha-ha, is it? Would that leave you with a big slot?
A ha-has was like one of those ditches.
Ditches.
To stop the sheep coming towards the house.
Interesting thought. Would it be this massive? Why would you build brick inside
I
it?
know. But if I'm like throwing it back with an element of it, could it be a ha-ha?
Yeah. Why would a ha-ha have an angle on
Well,
it?
I don't know.
Phil's suggestion that the archaeology in his trench may be a ha-ha isn't as far-fetched as it may sound. George III was affectionately known as Farmer George because of his passion for breeding sheep at Kew, so he might well have had a ha-ha put in to protect the palace from his flock. And it wasn't just farm animals that he bred here. He also had a private royal menagerie where he kept kangaroos.
I can only think that they came over with Joseph Banks, who was
one
the
of the ships, yes.
first informer, because he went off with Captain Cook on the Endeavour. They arrived eventually at Botany Bay, and he writes in a letter he saw this 80-pound mouse hopping towards him, which is a lovely description. And of course, what did they do? They shot it and ate it. But they bred here very successfully, and George III, in fact, was always trying to give them away. And, you know, there's sort of letters from the aristocracy in the country writing to each other saying, oh my God, you know, George III tried to give me a kangaroo and I had to tell him my fences weren't high enough. His doctor records walking in the gardens with him, and they all seem to end up going to see the kangaroos. I mean, that's a daily outing.
So I think I put a couple of concerned doctors.
Yes, that's right, that would be lovely.
You're going to run it out?
Originally, Nick and Jonathan agreed to look for the back wall of the palace using Stuart's new map for reference. But Nick, having had time to think about it, has decided to ignore Stuart's evidence and put in a third trench based on the archaeology.
Okay. I've eaten a lot of hats in my time. This one could be a Stetson.
So we think this is where the back wall is, based on Chambers' plan.
Well, if Phil is on the front wall, then the 18th century survey says it's 95 feet long.
Right.
So that's 95 feet. Because I'm going on the assumption, or the firm belief, that Phil has found the facade wall. If it's not, if it's part of the garden, it's the base for Nelson's column.
Trench 3 goes in to see if we can find the back wall of the palace, which is becoming increasingly important because in Trench 2, the brickwork's beginning to look like a courtyard. This latest discovery could support both theories, because it could either be inside the palace or out in the garden.
And then what you're doing is if you're coming out, if you come through this wall, you're actually into a courtyard.
Yeah.
And then I can explain bits and pieces about what's going on here. The latest phase does seem to be this drain, which is coming all the way around here. And it's cutting this sort of brickwork, this wall that's like here and over here.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got other bits and pieces going on. We've got perhaps a soak or something here behind me. Further sort of parts, bits and pieces again of courtyard rubble.
So we've got the courtyard, but is it inside the palace? Now that Phil's moved to Trench 3, everything hinges on him finding the back wall and finally locating the palace. If he finds the wall, we'll know that the courtyard's inside. If not, Stuart's right, and we'll be right back out in the garden.
It's Tony.
Hello?
Tony, I think there's something you better come and have a look at here.
Running all the way.
You wanted to get as close as you could to George III, didn't you?
I did.
We've actually got a picture of him. Look at that.
Oh, wow. What is this coin?
It's a Maundy threepence, so given away to the poor, with a tuppence, a penny and a fourpence from 1772.
So this would have actually been one of those coins that was given out by the monarch before Easter?
Exactly.
Oh, we've got another coin as well, which has also really excited you, hasn't it, Jonathan?
That one, I love this, Tony, that's a beauty. It's 50 years older, from the 1720s, this one. And you can see, in fact, it's quite heavily worn. The king's head's almost flat there. So this one's been in circulation for quite a while. So it must have been in someone's pocket when the White House itself was being built.
Do we know why it's in this extraordinary shape?
Well, it's come from sort of in the trench. It's all coming from near that drain,
It's actually
isn't it,
coming all
David?
from beside the drain. That actually came from the fill of the drain in the centre of the trench, so goodness knows what's happening down.
While the coins have given us a glimpse of what was happening during George's time at the palace, Phil may at last be able to tell us where the palace was.
Whoa, this looks more like it.
That's a wall, isn't it, Phil?
Oh, there's ever I saw one, and this is a wall.
Why do you say there's a wall here? All I can see is little scatters of rock.
Ah, but that's because you're not looking in the right place, Tony. This is absolutely solid. Look at that. Absolutely solid. And look, individual bricks. There's one. Comes along there and back. There's the next one. That doesn't happen with rubble. These are laid bricks.
Now that would seem to me to indicate that the survey information was completely up the chute.
It does, I'm afraid.
What? You cannot get the staff, can you?
What we found, I think what this is demonstrating is that map of 1771 is off the beam, really. So that's actually quite important to know that anyway, isn't it?
It also
let us be a little bit more triumphant.
It also demonstrates that the archaeology was spot on. Let's have a look where you've actually put the trench and said what we predicted we would get. Yeah, you can get rid of that one.
Yeah, this is the one that was wrong.
I think I'm being got at here.
That's our trench in there, isn't it?
Which shows that there should be a wall coming through on this line.
Prediction is
Now, with some luck, it should turn. There may be a metre or two error, but not a 25-metre error.
Yes.
Okay, let's assume for the moment that we've stopped beating Stuart up. What are we going to do with this trench now?
We'd already mentioned that there was possibly a cellar in this area. So we're still interested in that cellar. So there might be an awful lot to take out here, and there might be some very interesting finds at the base of that.
But the beauty of it all is we've actually picked up the wall in that trench there, and we've picked these walls up here in this trench, and we've now picked up that wall in that trench. So it really means that we can go anywhere in the plan of the building, put a trench on and know what we're going to find.
Yeah.
With these three
absolutely.
trenches, we really cracked it.
Stuart's completely perplexed. He can't understand how the map could be so inaccurate. So he's going back to the drawing board and he's collating all the old maps from scratch. Just across the lawns from our trenches, tucked away behind the trees, is a small building which served as the kitchen block for our palace.
Have a look at this then, Tony.
Cool.
This is where the meals for King George III were made.
I wasn't expecting this. What's this thing?
Right, we've got a great hearth here for roasting meat. So all these racks there are to put your side of beef or whatever over a dripping tray. And this mechanism is pulled down by a weight and turns the spit itself. So it's all there from the 18th century.
But these bits of meat would have been massive, wouldn't they?
Well, the really interesting thing is there's so many little rests for lots of different spits, because we know from the household accounts they were cooking masses of different meals every day for the royal household.
What kind of stuff?
For the Queen and the Princesses, you've got about 18 courses here, most of which are meat, very fancy things. Lamb tendrons and asparagus. Sad thing is, the poor king, he's having a very plain dinner. He has mutton cutlets and mutton, and that's about it, really, with apple dumplings and jelly.
OK, we've got the meat. What about the two veg?
OK, meat off the spit then, on your shoulder, bring it this way, and you need to take it through to the vegetable kitchens through that blocked arch.
Are they still there?
They are. Let's have a look. OK, Tony, we're on the other side of this door. Here's the... Flip this back.
So would this have been a serving hatch?
Exactly. Meat, thank you. Drag it through.
Yeah.
And then here is the vegetable kitchen.
And would this have been the actual table they'd have prepared the vegetables?
Preparation tables, no doubt. Plates and things up there, knives hanging down, chop. Cook over there.
Still here, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Steaming pans over there. Now...
Where do I go?
Out here. Rejoin the meat.
Yeah.
And we make our way toward the White House.
Now, look, I'm not going to go all the way to the White House with my meat. It's about 50 metres.
Yeah, and through wind and rain if you go out that door.
Yeah.
So where else would you go? We'll have a look here. Here are the makings of a tunnel.
But it's bricked up. How do we know where it leads?
Well, we don't. So I'm hoping that John can help us in the garden.
John, why are you up there?
I'm trying to see where the building is so we can track the tunnel.
Is it a totally stupid idea, or is there something down there?
Well, I don't know. We've just got to try with the radar.
When will we have the result?
Not tonight.
Tomorrow?
Well...
Hopefully tomorrow we'll find a tunnel. And more of the building that it led to. Join us and see what we uncover after the break. Two days ago, I was asking why on earth we were bothering to try and find Mad King George III's palace when we were pretty sure we knew where it was. Well, 48 hours later, I can categorically tell you that the palace is there. Or possibly there, or it might be there, or it could be down there. And the one person more than any other who's created this confusion is Stuart, who yesterday was practically driven from the site after one allegation about where it might be. But like an archaeological Dracula, he's come back from the dead with another location for this flipping palace.
I don't know whether I'm going to help sort the situation out or confuse it even further, I have to say. This is the White House in here, in the background. And on here, these are the three trenches. This one here is the one behind you. As you can see, it's on close to the back wall of the White House. The one here is outside the house. And that trench over there, the most interesting one, which we thought was on the front wall of the White House, actually is inside the building, and the front wall might be even further out between the grass and the path.
Stuart seems to be shifting the palace all over the place. His first theory put it here and trench 1 into the garden. Wrong. But this latest interpretation of the maps is even more dramatic. It shifts the palace 25 metres south, putting trench 1 into the middle of the building and fills supposed back wall in trench 3 into an outhouse. Once again, confusion reigns. Jonathan, your eyebrows actually raised.
Well, they did. When you said we thought that it was, some of us still do think that's the front wall of the White House. If not, it's a cruel twist of fate, isn't it?
You know, you screwed up. You screwed up. You screwed up big time yesterday. You gave me a duff map. My confidence in you was totally shattered. And yet the archaeology in the ground still supports that best fit that we had yesterday. That the wall over there is the front of the building, and then when we predicted from that there would be walls in this trench at the back over there, lo and behold, we found them. They're all on the same alignment.
The other thing is that trench 2, where we expected to find the courtyard in the middle of the house, is a courtyard. We've got a vaulted subterranean structure where we wanted a cellar. We've got a front wall with nothing beyond it for the front of the house.
We've got two options. The first thing we need to do is undertake a geophysical survey along the front of the house. This will locate the main wall, if it's further south than Phil thinks it is in his trench. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to extend the trench behind us. We need to find some more architectural features within the building, then we can lock our position down. Then we'll know where we are.
There is actually a third option. Come and have a look at this trench I was digging yesterday.
I don't know why we're bothering to do all this, because even if Stuart is wrong, he'll produce another map.
Oh, yeah, I know.
He knows me too well.
Now look, this morning, earlier on, I actually got up into there, and look, there's an end wall in there.
Yep.
Now, if we extend the trench just a little bit, we should be able to find out whether that wall continues across there. In other words, whether it's an integral part of the house, and also possibly if there's a return there, or whether it's a totally isolated feature.
Yep.
Geophysics have been hoping to chase our secret tunnel, but they've had to postpone their search so they can widen their survey to see if Stuart's right and the palace does extend to the south of the sundial.
John, you're going to put us out of our considerable misery.
Well, I'm not sure if Stuart's going to be too happy. I mean, I've extended the survey 35 metres beyond this wall here, and you want more walls, don't you?
I'd have liked them, yeah.
Well, that's the wall we had on day one, and there's your 35 metres, nothing at all. That's the modern road.
I still don't understand this, because if this is the front wall, what's happening at the back makes absolutely no sense at all in either plan system that we've got. It's sort of doing that. I can't square that with the evidence I've got.
Are we happy that this is the front wall now?
Well, I am. Surely what we need to do is to get Henry to plan all the walls in the trenches, get that on the map, then get the various plans of the building and move them round to see if we get a best fit.
I think we're focusing too much on the plans. I think we're allowing ourselves to chase the walls that are marked on the plans, and we're trying to find them, when really we should be letting the archaeology speak for itself.
The simple fact is it's more complex than we thought, isn't it?
It's far more complex.
In order to resolve it all, the maps are abandoned and Henry gets to work mapping the precise location of each archaeological feature. These results will be combined with Chambers' plan to find the best fit, and should allow us finally to locate the palace. But in Trench 3, Phil's uncovering yet more confusion. What he thought was the back wall of the palace turns out to be part of a cellar that appears to be completely detached from the main building. Given what you've got, this could be a discrete building. It could be an outhouse or something, couldn't it? Given what you've got.
What we don't know, because we haven't cleaned it up yet, is just what it's doing that way. We know that this wall now does not run that way. So it projects it further north in the building than we perhaps had given it credit for in the first instance.
So on the basis of the archaeology here, Stuart could still be right.
He could still be right, and we and I could have miscalculated the position of the palace. But there's a complication to that, because if we were right here in finding the north wall at about this point, we should be able to track it over there. And
so this trench here.
Exactly. We just opened that one up.
Yeah.
And what Chambers shows in his plan is that there are a couple of royal toilets on the inside of the north wall at about this point. So we should find a little rectangular brick opening.
Okay. And here is a rectangular brick opening. Does that look like a privy to you?
Well, it's got potential.
It's got potential?
Yes.
It's a potential privy.
Yeah.
It's a bit small, isn't it? Can I get in the trench?
Well, how much room do you need?
Well, you wouldn't have much room to move around, would you? If you're a fat king, you'd get wedged. If this is the royal privy, then everything else starts to make sense.
Right, Neil, how's the scan of the floor plan coming on?
No problem, I've already got it on my system.
Henry's finished recording the archaeological features, and the trick now is to see if he and Stuart can fit them into Chambers' plan. We might not yet be able to tell the location of George's home, but Chambers shows that it was splendid. It epitomised the grandeur of one of the great architectural periods in our history.
I think when George II gets going, that's when Kew comes into its own. And we tend to think of the whole epoch from 1714 to 1830, strictly when the Georgian kings reigned, as one of stately classical architecture.
Georgian houses. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, but there's another side to the story because the kings themselves, they were breaking all the rules. What they were doing, once they were here, is building follies around the garden, representing world architecture, Islamic, Chinese architecture. So you could basically go out of your door and walk around the world and back again.
Was George III as uncultured as we tend to think George I was?
Not at all. He was very much a man of culture. He loved the arts, he loved the sciences, he was a marvellous patron. At the same time, there was a big contrast in his personality. He was also a great family man, but also lived a very austere personal life, which is why I think the family was set up here at Kew. It was to get away from the temptations of court, if you like.
George's attempt to live a frugal life and protect his sons from the vices of court came to nothing. His sons rebelled against their Spartan upbringing and took to the bottle with a vengeance. Meanwhile, our attempts to create the kind of glasses they would have quaffed out of have moved on to the next phase. Bob Crooks made 6 wine glasses for us, and they've been handed over to our artists to be embellished. Steve's engraving the first glass with fruit and flowers.
How long would it take to do a design like that?
Well, this one would take 2 to 3 hours to complete the whole of the glass. And the same process would have applied in the 18th century. Engrave the shapes of the leaves, use smaller wheels for the feather edge and the veins. And I say the process simply hasn't changed at all. That one, sort of 2 to 3 hours for grapes and leaves. This glass, which has got the Prince of Wales plumes. Now this one, I've already spent 5 hours on that as it is.
And is that more or less finished?
No, there's probably another 3-4 hours left to complete the design.
Another form of decoration was to paint directly onto the glass with special enamel paint. It was a delicate process, and only the wealthiest families could afford glasses like these. The designs they chose would have reflected their passion for Oriental or classical themes, and would have been a good way to show off their sophistication and love of culture. Hopefully they'll be ready for some Georgian revelry later today. After 3 days of humiliation with his maps, Stuart has finally redeemed himself. He's managed to find a fit between the features in the ground and Chambers' trusty plan, and it looks pretty tight.
This is the Chambers plan. This is a plan with all the trenches on all the walls here in yellow that you've found. If you do this, put them together, we can explain virtually every feature that you've found. Let me take you through it. Right. Over there, where we had trench 1, that ghost wall that you're saying was robbed out, that is the ghost wall of the south facade. Yeah. And I hold my hat off to you on that one. You're right on that one. So I eat humble pie about that side. You're bang on there. Well. If you come to the back, which is the trench over here that Phil was digging, the deep trench, that fits perfectly with that building there, even to being divided with these little narrow slots here for either dumping rubbish down or whatever that building is. But it fits that exactly, see? Come further along, this wall in here that you've picked up matches exactly that wall on Chambers' plan. It just drops on perfectly.
Now the dust's settled, Stuart isn't anxious to take the rap for the muddle. He's blaming the maps.
There was a cartographic crime committed here, I can assure you.
Are you sure it wasn't your cartographic crime? Are you sure it's right?
Absolutely certain. No,
okay.
we'll crack on.
Looks good. Excellent. We found it. Thank God.
At last, we've managed to find the exact position of the palace. And we can actually identify the rooms we've been excavating. The wall in Trench 1 was the footing for the facade, and behind it lay the most elaborate of staterooms. Drawing rooms, libraries, and dining rooms. The brickwork in Trench 2 was an internal courtyard after all, and would have had a stately fountain at its centre. George's privy was tucked away at the back of the building. And Phil's mystery floating cellar was part of an outhouse that was attached to the back wall of the palace. One thing that Chambers can't help us with is our tunnel, which we think linked the kitchen block to the White House. But geophysics are on the case. They've been using radar to chase the signal they picked up yesterday. And because it's pretty rare to find a secret tunnel, all the gardeners are keen to lend a hand.
There we go. Zummy. Yeah, we've got it. We've got it. It's over by the tallest tree over there.
That one there?
And we've tracked the line through, and it works.
So, if I came out of the kitchen underground
Yeah.
with my plates of meat, I'd go hurtling off in this direction, which I can't get to because of all the fences. I'll go round, all right?
OK, I'll catch you up.
See you later.
Don't drop it.
Deep and opening. Hey?
Come on! Here we are.
Yeah. Well, look, this is what we got on the radar. These reflections, I mean, we got a line of them. And when we put them on the map, I mean, they just projected back in a straight line in through the kitchen door.
It may well still be the tunnel. We've augured down through there, and what we're actually picking up is sand.
Oh, but I don't care. We've got something in a straight line that leads back to the... Maybe it's a pathway then and it's a tunnel further on.
Well, our time's run out. And if it's good enough for John, it's good enough for me. One last question remains. What happened to the original Tudor house? And in Trench 2, Jonathan thinks he has the answer.
Right, here we are then in the heart of the building. And we ask the question, was this a new building in the 1730s or was it built on top of an older structure? Well, here we find characteristically Tudor bricks.
How do you know they're Tudor?
Well, they're not like all of the bricks that were made for the Georgian parts of this building. There's not a single sandy-coloured or purple one amongst them. They're deep red and they're shallower than the Georgian bricks. They may well be reused, but you must remember that in the 1670s there's an old house on this site. And John Evelyn visited it and saw its orange gardens and said it was remarkable for its time. That's what this seems to be.
Do we know whether that part of the trench is part of the earlier build?
It could be part of an earlier hard standing or a courtyarded garden. It's certainly got some water features running through it, and all we know is that they were still functioning when those Georgian threepenny bits were washed up 230 years ago in the drains.
So we now know that the palace was originally a fine Tudor mansion with a beautiful secluded central courtyard. And when the royal family took it over, it was extended and refurbished by William Kent. He added the great facade to the old house. The palace, surrounded by its wonderful gardens, was George's favourite home for 30 years, until it became too old and rickety to maintain, and so was demolished in 1802. 3 days ago, I said I wanted to get into the heart of the White House, and in this trench, we really have. 200 years ago, when George III had finished his ablutions, he'd have walked down one of his magnificently appointed corridors. He'd have stepped out into his open courtyard with its bubbling water features and fountains. He'd have peered into one of his staterooms, and then he'd have opened his big front doors and looked into his garden, his own version of Versailles, and he would have smiled as he watched his drunken sons and their hangers-on disporting themselves in the evening light.
Well, there you are, Tony. That's a glass with the White House on it that we made ourselves.
To George III.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.